Hey everybody, what's going on? This is Matt, and today I wanted to talk about a couple of traveling tips and practicing your language while you're going out on your next vacation or travel. So, I think that this is something that a lot of people have a plan to do, right? They have a trip coming up and they want to practice their language on this trip. And I think that before that happens, it's good to, I think, consider a couple of possibilities, consider some things that could happen to you, and to prepare accordingly. So what are those things? Well, I think the first thing is definitely an underestimation of your abilities. If you go out and practice your language, like on a vacation or a trip, in another country, be prepared that you might not be as good as you think you are. Now, of course, you might be pleasantly surprised on the positive side, but I have seen a lot of instances of people, including myself, going to a foreign country and practicing those skills and finding out that, oh, I am not as good as I thought I was, whether that is from a speaking perspective, from a listening comprehension perspective, or reading comprehension. And so I think that is very important to just keep in the back of your mind. You really want to have fun on your trip, and I think that's important. But just remember that it could be on this rude awakening that you're maybe not as good as you thought you were, and that's okay. Remember, it's all part of the process. I think it's just something to at least have in the back of your mind so that you don't get discouraged with your language learning. Okay, I think the second thing to think about is that it's very likely you might be intimidated to use the language when you first get there. So when you're at home, you're feeling pumped, you're feeling motivated, you're ready to go, and the second you get to the airport or wherever you're staying, there's this kind of anxiety of practicing the language and feeling embarrassed and having that nervous kind of feeling of using it. And I think that just be okay with that. Slowly work your way with using the language. You don't have to just dive right in if you're not comfortable with that. Just slowly and incrementally get your feet wet, and what you'll find is you'll get more and more comfortable learning the language. I think, and speaking the language rather. And I think too about that, if you're worried, just remember, don't be. If you just slowly dip your feet into the water, you're going to be able to get more and more comfortable, and before you know, at the end of your trip, you're going to be practicing it a lot more. So I think that's pretty important to think about as well. I think another thing to consider as well is be aware that there's probably, and this depends on the language that you're learning, that there's probably going to be a lot of people that are going to speak English to you or want to speak English with you. And this is definitely very apparent if you're in kind of very touristy areas. And, in touristy areas, people tend to speak English just because that is the industry that they're in. They're in tourism, and they naturally need to know English to speak to their customers who don't know languages. So this is the people at hotels, this is the people at restaurants, like waiters, tour guide operators, stuff like that. So just be aware of that. And some of these people might humor you, but if your skills aren't there, it's very possible that they'll just revert to English. And so that could be very discouraging for some people, but it's definitely worth a try, but just be aware that that's something that can happen. And I think the less accurate you are with your language learning skills, the more likely that's to happen, right? If you can speak super accurately, clearly, no difficulties, I don't think they have a problem with that. But for a lot of people, they do run into that trouble. Just be aware that people might revert to English, and also there's this kind of selfish end on the other side where they'll want to practice their English with you. So just be aware of that. I think that's important. If you really want to get past that, I think being really firm with just staying in the target language, not transitioning to English is a way to overcome that. And if you kind of have that firmness, people will probably stay in your target language. But I think that also assumes that you're relatively competent in the language, and that it's not just this huge grind for them to understand what you're saying. So I think that's something to be cognizant of. I think the other thing too is that if you do want to practice your language more, it's actually best to get away from some of the touristy areas. Go off the beaten path. Go to places where there's not necessarily tourists, or just away from the main tourist areas. And you'll find that people will naturally speak to you in the target language, right? Like if you're in these classic tours or tourist areas, there's going to be a lot more English than the foreign language. So just be aware that the further out you go, the more non-touristy areas, the more opportunities you're probably going to have to practice the language that you're learning. I think this is a big mistake a lot of people run into. And so, just be aware that to practice that language, you might need to go other places. Of course, it depends on the language, how well spoken is English where you're traveling to. But it's something to think about as well. And I think the last thing is just have fun. This is supposed to be a fun trip for you. It's supposed to be great for language learning, but also just an enjoyable experience and hopefully relaxing as well. So just remember that. Have fun with it in the end of the day. You're going to make mistakes. Be okay with those mistakes. Learn from them. Don't stress out too much, and just have a lot of fun. And I think just take some of these tips with you and think about them in the back of your mind. You're going to have a better experience on your next trip. So let me know what you think. What's your experience been traveling to other countries and using a foreign language? Let me know, and I'll see you in the next video. Take care.